Okay, now we are now recording. So we've just entered uh, a meeting. We have Sandeep Jaitly, we have Michael Habner, and we have Charles Speakman online. Um, there are we do not have a quorum to basically start an official meeting of the CDC, but we're having an informal discussion of topics related to the proposed meeting topic. And we're recording this conversation for purposes of posterity to be reviewed at a later time. We intend to hopefully get a quorum of people when Chris Guttridge returns next week. So next meeting we'll make it a little bit more official, but we're just discussing around matters of bills of exchange and things that are on our mind as a precursor to later topics. So let's go back to Sandeep. Go ahead, Sandeep. What were you just saying?
Thanks, Michael. Yes, I was just saying that building is considered sort of a very it's not considered amenable to bills of exchange because it's not considered as growing things. You're not making produce. You're not making you haven't got a field of wheat or whatever's considered traditional for futures markets and bills of exchange, which are the same thing. People think of building as being something that has to be, or it would be outside of that it involves debt. It involves that kind of thing. When it doesn't have to be that way. The guys that are sort of in extractive industries, iron ore, gold mining, oil and gas, they consider whatever they're doing as having zero labor cost, both morally and literally. And they want to bring their commodities to the market without an expectation of any price. So they haven't sold the stuff that they're extracting. They're extracting it with the hope of selling it. And this is in the context as well of falling market prices for whatever they're doing. So that's sort of where we were before the recording started. We were at that stage of realizing that these guys are just speculating on getting a return, and they're going to be marginalized by the system that they believe in or that they don't consider as being a part of the problem. So I think that's where we got to.
Yeah, and then I was talking about how goods are produced and why they will come to market. One of the key features of a bill is that it's an expression of cooperation and coordination between people. So the bill, that coordination and cooperation allows for transactions to occur that would otherwise not have occurred if, for example, people were expected to produce goods, bring them to market, and just hope to sell them at market. This is one of the discussions that I have with people regularly around me, which is like, well, if you want to be exchanging in gold and silver, just bring something to market and we'll pay each other with gold and silver. And I say to people, well, it can't actually work like that because even in gold and silver, because that's not why somebody produces something.
Mm. You know, that's the key thing, is that they don't. It's sort of like we don't actually need to go around with gold coins in our pockets. This is what someone else was asking me once, is that, do you think we'll go back to using or having gold coins in our pockets? I said, well, you can just use the bill of exchange for gold. You don't need to use an actual gold coin, unless you're going to be doing something that specifically involves coined metal of gold, which is unusual,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So
that's all.
it's sort of, you know, they when you say gold to a lot of people, it's not they concentrate on the gold, and it's not about the gold with us. You know, it's about what you're doing with that gold. You know, and that
Yeah,
means it's constantly in circulation, and I think, as we were mentioning before the video, there's a lot of stuff going on with the steel industry here, with the Scunthorpe plant,
right.
which has Chinese owners at the moment, and they're being businessmen, as one has to be in the current system, and they're noticing that they're not being able to maintain the cost of the overheads
Yeah,
in doing what they're doing. You know, and whether that's from lack of demand, as you have to phrase it, or whether it's from increasing union costs or whatever the reason, they're saying we can't operate like this. And if you're a pure recycler, the only the cost of the material is only up to delivery of that material, and that's a big saving, morally and literally, as you know, as they're going to find out. You know, there's not just a cost to cutting down a mountain in Peru or whatever for copper in an environmental sense. There's a cost of not understanding that everything we need is already around us in a much more easy fashion than ripping up a mountain, or that way of thinking. You know,
yeah,
it's very dangerous work. It's work that I have never done. I don't think any of you guys have ever done. You know, it's not work that we do, but there are people who obviously do it, and we don't want them doing it ultimately, and that takes a real sea change in the way people think about all of the everything, everything. You know,
yes.
watching.
That's.
Go on, Michael.
I've actually worked in the extractive industries for many decades. I'm not working in that industry now, but uh, yeah. So I'm. It's a topic that your view on it's a little bit different. I guess I'm keen to hear you elaborate on those ideas at some stage. But yeah, I don't disagree. It's a lot of effort and it's a lot of risk, and there are actually materials that are all around us that could otherwise be brought to market.
Mm, mm, mm,
Um, can I just want to bring something that came to mind
mm,
after considering what Professor Fekete said over all the years, particularly about how he talks about how his proposition for how gold and silver can be brought back to circulation, which was opening the mint,
mm.
or primarily opening the mint. Uh, can I put a proposition forward that I'm not entirely convinced that that's necessarily the way that gold and silver are going to be brought back to circulation? Are you in agreement with that, Sandeep?
I think I'd agree. I think I would agree with that. You know, the mint doesn't need to be brought into the equation or into the formula for the solution.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's just something that I've personally come to the conclusion of. I think it's the
I
what
mean, Charles, what would you say? I mean, my logic is just that if you have the capacity and ability to refine, you don't need to go to a specific sort of, you know, government institution in order to do it.
that's right. I agree.
Mm,
I do agree with that. I think that uh, we can we can talk about the problems that are out there, and they are legion.
mm,
Um, the the way that we what we need to do is exactly what CDC, what your proposition is within in CDC, is start demonstrating and start writing bills amongst ourselves for provision of these things, so that there is actually a market, and these things are actually being done as a counterpoint to the whole way that things are done in the fiat system. And it starts from a very small level, a private level, an individual level, rather than something that is going to come from the top down or from the state.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
bills start from the individual level, an individual need,
mm,
um, rather than attempting to change everybody else around us and everything else around us.
yeah, yeah. I think because Professor was brought up in the post-war environment when you still had a gold standard and or the Bretton Woods standard and all of that, it heavily influenced his way of thinking, sort of,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
maybe he wanted to return to that kind of, you know, that kind of way of doing or that kind of way of establishing relations between
Well,
countries or whatever. But it's
yeah,
not.
we all do.
Yeah.
We all want to. We we can see the benefits of exchanging gold and silver as opposed to the
Mm,
fiat system, and we all want to go back there. But it's a matter of the path of
yes.
how it's going to be
Yeah.
there, and that's not in any way to discount the professor's outstanding contribution to the level of knowledge
Sure.
um, and
Absolutely.
insights into gold and silver, but the path is not what he proposed. I do not think,
No.
um,
No. You know.
which which is this discussion about bills of exchange, because the bill is critical. The bill
Yeah.
is the key component. It's an expression of cooperation. It's an expression of coordination of
It
producing
is.
things.
It is.
So yeah,
You know,
um,
this is very important to get across, is that we can do it ourselves. You know, we don't need Canberra or Westminster um, involved directly in it. Um,
well, no,
they
this was
will.
a point that was briefly raised in the previous discussion about the exclusion of the state. It's
Mm,
um, yeah, we definitely don't need any of those things. We have the
yeah,
knowledge, we have the will, and we have the power to be able to do these things ourselves without any
we
third
do.
party.
You know, the
Um,
guilds in London were established well before Parliament was established in Britain. Yeah, and that's where the resource of accumulated knowledge is passed from master to apprentice, and all of that happened. The king did not say this, decree it, and it happened. It was already happening before the king established his parliament at Westminster. So I think that's the way that we have to think, um,
Absolutely.
involving guilds. I'm not a member of a guild personally, but I'd like to be. And everyone has to think along those lines. What guild are you? And guilds work in unison. Even though they're individuals, they still all work together in unison. And I think that's the way that we have to be thinking. You know, this is. It might seem obvious to us, but it's not obvious to everyone else. And
no,
it's not just a case of like being a member of a professional body, whatever that means. You know, medics need supplies. So the way that is all coordinated has to be by a bill of exchange. And the way that medicine would be coordinated, obviously it has to be planned. So it's not something that's done on a speculation, or shouldn't be something that's done on a speculation. As with, you know, digging out the gold ore in Peru. So that way of thinking is very important from that perspective. Pharmaceuticals and medicine are very much involved in that. You know, the way that we express bills of exchange is utilized in other ways. So it's utilized in chemistry, it's utilized in mathematics. So it's not like this is the only the way that we're expressing and writing bills of exchange that's the only use what we're doing. It has other applications as well, in understanding chemistry better, in understanding electromechanics better, and that's the way that we have to think. Sort of, you know, there was an argument when I was at school about whether electricity flows from negative to positive or positive to negative. And the teacher said, well, electricity is made of electrons, so they have a negative charge, so negative charges repel, so it goes from negative to positive. And that is an explanation. You know, it seems fine in the realm of our understanding of electrons and electricity and all of that, but it's not the full picture, because it doesn't include the positive whole, which is left behind when the negative electron moves. So yes, one part of it is the electrons flowing or passing something from negative to positive, but also with that, it's the positive holes passing something from positive to negative. And positive holes have their, well, you most hear about positive holes when you're learning about semiconductors and how they work in school. So with your solar panels, your transistors, your P doping, your N doping, that kind of thing, that's when you appreciate, or that's when I appreciated the stuff about positive holes. But then if you ask a non-chemist or someone who's more physics inclined rather than chemistry inclined, is a positive hole a physical thing? They'll say no, but they'll say an electron is a physical thing. And it's sort of like, well, this is the problem with physicists. They confuse sort of an understanding of the picture because they've got a specific sort of gappy way of understanding things, which doesn't quite get to the truth of the matter in as much as we can. So all of that methodology, the way we express it in equations and all that kind of thing, can be improved upon. Because if we start thinking in terms of changes in quantities, just like the bid and the offer represents a change in quantity, a change in quantity of the goods across our table, you know, we can think of that way of thinking more generally in terms of concepts which involve changes of quantities, which a lot of concepts involve. From electricity to chemistry and whatnot. So it's more than just strawberries and bricks. We're talking about strawberries and bricks because that's what everybody has a familiarity with. But we're more we would not be averse to dealing in protons, neutrons, and electrons in the way that we are establishing the mechanics of bills and exchange. It is applicable to those as well, but that's not our topic for the moment. You know, that's another topic. So this way that we're doing, or going to be doing, or are doing things, it's more than just what it seems. You know, it's a better way of understanding things as well. I think most easily it can be seen or experienced by the decimal system. So 1.34 or 1.333. Now, 1.333 with infinitely many threes, a physicist will say that that's recurring. Those threes are recurring. But each of those threes are of a factor of 10 smaller than the previous one, or a multiple of 10 of the one after it. So to talk about it repeating, even though they're all the same size threes, okay, it's sort of like, well, you're missing the point. It's sort of like the one that's 4 decimal points away is 1/10,000th of that 3, if you get what I mean. You know, so just because we write them all the same size, they've missed the point of what 1.33333 means. Because we still have this Roman numeral way of thinking about quantities as split into 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It's a very insidious way of thinking, and it's very easy to fall into that trap. But we have to remember that we're beyond Roman numerals. Okay, we're not in Roman numeral land anymore. We've got a very sophisticated system that's been here goodness knows how many years. Certainly you can say in counting in the many millennia in India and that region. But it's only really been here and appreciated from probably the 15th century. You know, it was up until then that Roman numerals had a very strong a sway on the way that we thought. And I don't know, maybe it seemed like the devil's work or whatever to see decimals in action. But if you tell people that there's an easier way of doing calculations than on an abacus or on all of that kind of gubbins, where you just move the decimal point, they'll be like, oh, what's that? What's going on there? You know, that's moving the decimal points. You know, that it would seem like magic to them. It's sort of like they would not, understandably, they would not, you know, appreciate the subtlety of what you're doing there. So in base 10, when you multiply the number by 10, you know, you move the decimal point that way. If you're dividing by 10, you move it the other way.
Yeah.
So we can refine that way of doing calculations which makes calculations a lot easier and more inherent to understand. So obviously, when we're dealing in base 10, it's not very often if we come across something that we have to do that we need to multiply it by 10. It will always be something, it will be multiplying by 9.3 or 5.8 or something like that, you know. So there is a way that we can coordinate it such that it's equivalent to thinking in terms of 10. And this is what I'm going to be working on in some papers later, you know, but it's an easier way of thinking about what we're doing with calculations. You know, it's sort of like, yes, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, fine. But 1.956, it has addition built into it already. So that needs to be examined, not examined, but it needs to be explained to people a lot more at the school level than it actually is. They think about, or they're taught about abstractions such as, you know, squares and triangles and all of these things. It's sort of like they can't draw a circle though, and they keep on talking about it as if they've drawn it. So again, it comes back to our bills of exchange way of thinking. We all understand circular and obtaining or trying to obtain something that's circular, but the way that we're taught about these things from a very young age, it's as if they're a given. The circle is there, it's that, and that is that. It's sort of like, well, how do you get there? How do you get your square? How do you get your circle? That's the important part. And this is what we're going to be, expanding on slowly. Pi = 3 is good enough for most engineers. You don't need 3.14. That 400ths is we don't often deal in one thing and something that's 100 times bigger than it. I mean, think about that on your table. It's sort of, okay, I'm looking at my table now. I've got a cup, and it's very unusual to deal with a cup on the table. Well, that's not unusual, okay, but it would be unusual to deal with a cup on the table and something that's 100 times bigger than the cup on the table as well. But that's what we're doing, or 10 times bigger than the cup on the table as well. But that's what we're doing when we use base 10 in arithmetic. So we have to ask ourselves, is base 10 the appropriate base to use when we're doing our calculations? Should we be using a smaller base or a larger base?
Would it be fair to say, I'm not a mathematician, I can't really talk about those topics in any depth with you, Sandeep. Would it be fair to say something along the lines of, well, when you're comparing something like the questions of whether we should be using a base 10 system or some other system of calculation, that in the area of human exchange, the bill of exchange is a similar kind of level of change of thinking, in terms of it's the whole worldview that we need to discard basically the entire worldview and start again with a completely different worldview, one based around exchanges of metals and bills of exchange involved in the exchanges of those metals. Is that what you're trying to
You're
say?
right. I think you got it spot on. You got it spot on there.
And I totally agree with that.
Yeah, you got it spot on, because what we're talking about, or what I've just been talking about,
complete change in worldview.
it's someone sitting at some fancy American college might scoff at what we're doing because they think, oh, this is very simple, and it's easy. They're just talking about glass and raspberries and and growing that, but they don't appreciate that it applies to them and their way of thinking. Because when they pick up an equation or whatever, they all use base 10 to do the calculation. And they don't realize something more subtle to do with calculation. This will blow their mind if they learn about this. The way that we're talking about bases in terms of number bases, this will be as shocking to that fancy American college set as it would as this kind of stuff would be to everyone else. So it's it's we're not just isolationists here in what we're doing. We're universal. We're universal in what we're doing.
There's an aspect of a bill, or what would you say? I'm just sort of just talking off the top of my head here. When you write a bill, it's about relationships and about goes into areas of morality and how we interact as human beings. Our relationships with each other as human beings. It's really fundamental in that regard. It goes into areas of trust, morality, value exchange, and things like that. Types of things that cannot be measured as such. It's purely subjective in terms of our human experience.
Yeah.
So
this is, and Charles, feel free to butt in on anything you disagree with or agree with.
Nothing yet. Nothing yet.
This is when we are working in this way, fully in the CDC way, words like trust and promise, they're viewed negatively because the introduction of the word "I promise to pay the bearer" was a lie. it was so our things are given. It's sort of like it's beyond trust because it's so cooperative that I don't even know of a concept beyond it, but you know what I mean. It's as soon as we start writing these words down, that's when the meaning is lost, or they do you know what I mean? All the gold is sitting in the Bank of England and we've got all of the paper. So there's something not right with that.
I certainly think well, when you talk to people and even in your own minds when you're considering these things, I've had a few discussions with people in terms of trust. Like I say, well, look, the dollar is when you're doing an exchange in dollars, there's no trust involved in that exchange. It's the antithesis of trust, and you get looked at as if you've got two heads. People just simply cannot comprehend that there is this concept that there is no trust involved in a exchange that has been done or is being done in a fiat currency, whereas in a bill of exchange, one that's voluntarily agreed with people and settled in metal, there is genuine trust involved. It's a concept that people just cannot get their heads around. It's incomprehensible in many ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a complete change in worldview, but it is something that can be understood.
It is something that can be understood. I think it's because it's it's not difficult to understand. It's intuitive. Everybody has this intuitive way of doing things. They just don't understand how they're not, or they've been put in a position where they're not doing it, basically. And invariably, it involves it revolves around the government somehow, and that's the issue. And I'd like to sort of distinguish the government from my local council. My local council is who I consider my government. My government is not who I consider. Well, I don't consider them as my local council. Let's just leave it like that. I think you understand what I mean, Charles. You know, so it's like it's that's where the problems start. It's you can rely on your bills of exchange. You can rely on the people behind your bills of exchange. That's the way that it works. That's the way that community and society works. And talking about reliance on government, you know, it's obfuscating what the word rely is about. It's bills of exchange are that. Even the words that they use in Parliament about making bills, well, what are they talking about? They're fantasies of bills of exchange, you know. So it truly is a charade and a fantasy it's a charade and a fantasy. They're mimicking what should be going on in a true council with writing bills of exchange and such things, which is what we're attempting, and all of our members are attempting. They're trying to mimic that, and the words that they use. Well, obviously, the general public are not going to appreciate a bill of parliament as being a perversion of a bill of exchange. It's they won't appreciate that, but we will. And it's a big it's a big task that we all need to do, you know, but it's not a difficult task. You know, I don't honestly think it, because it's intuitive to everyone, it's not difficult. You know, it's not trying to convince them that, you know, you need a railway through your garden or something like that.
One of the things that you come up against is this idea that, well, I guess this whole thing gets deeply philosophical, but people need government. They need the fiat. They need the fiat currency. They're so dependent on it, and you and I are too, in many ways. We're trying to break that cycle, or break that way of thinking in ourselves primarily. But people need this government. So if I say to somebody, "Oh, look, I want to would you like to write a bill of exchange? I'll produce the corn, you'll produce the potatoes, and we'll you know, do an exchange, or we'll do it for, you know, on such and such an arrangement." They say, "Well, I don't need that. I can already get those potatoes by using fiat currency. I'll just involve government in my life, and I don't need to be able to have to do a bill of exchange." So one way of looking at what we want to do is we have this competition in some ways that from the fiat system. People can get everything that they need. They can see that they can get everything that they need from the fiat system, so they don't to have to coordinate with their fellow man.
Right, so I've got a sort of view on this. I suppose when you say they can get what they need, they get what they're given more than they're actually getting what
Indeed.
they need, and it's because, what they're being given is always there, but the terms on which they're being given these things are constantly changing. They're getting less, and it's just
That's
being
right.
imposed on them. And I think, going back to what you were saying about the mint, it's just some sort of institution that can endorse, something to rely on. And I think with the bills and what we're talking about, it's down to the individual, on each side of that, and it's their reputation. And I think that's something that people intuitively will prefer compared to, you know, in England, it's like if I go to Sainsbury's and I want to buy an avocado, they might not have an avocado there,
Mm.
you know.
Mm.
And I'm putting my trust in Mr. Sainsbury's who decides on that day or that week, do I want to offer avocados this week or not? Well, I'm only going to do it if I'm making this margin, whereas planning your life in a more predictable way, people are going to like that. People are going to like being able to think ahead because that brings stability. That takes away the anxiety of not knowing what's going to happen, you
My
know.
experience is the opposite, and I don't think there's actually much good news there in terms of uh, people people rely on they don't want bills of exchange because they can see the reliance on that they rely on the system. They rely and trust in the fiat system. They rely on Mr. Sainsbury to give them their provision. In the same way in Australia, I know in the UK it's kind of similar as well. People have their provision on welfare. They see they won't write a bill of exchange because they don't need the bill of exchange because they rely on their welfare, which is basically government giving handouts, which is basically just government redistributing wealth from your fellow man. But they so they're actually hostile to the idea of writing a bill of exchange because they don't want to plan ahead. They want someone else to plan ahead for them.
I
Yeah.
would, I agree and I disagree. I think, on the base of it, it looks like that. But I think, yeah, I just think there's a side that these people don't want to be in this situation intuitively. I think there was, I mentioned it to Sandeep earlier, but I can't remember. But yeah, I just think intuitively, people, they don't like being at the mercy of other people.
Oh,
Um, And
sorry.
if and yeah, so that's what I was saying to Sandeep before. It's about whether people can understand what's going on. People don't understand what a bill of exchange is. If you tell them what a bill of exchange is, they don't understand it immediately. They can't see it. Even if they can touch it, they don't know someone that's used it for a year and had a good experience. So it's just us coming to them with, try this. All right, I've got time for that. I've got to do this, this, and this today. I haven't got time to think about that. So the way that this needs to be presented, in my view, is the same sort of user-friendly ability that you have going into Sainsbury's. It needs to be as convenient to interact with as going to a Sainsbury's,
You see the in my when
if
you
that's
walk into a
possible.
Sainsbury's, you see the avocado, you see it
You
there,
do. You
and you
do.
think, oh, it's always going to be there. It's a
Exactly.
marketing trick. Many times I've been there and the avocados aren't there, or
Well,
the
that's it. And
bananas aren't there.
we
Or
saw
the
in COVID, that it just goes, you get a little a little dislocation in that supply chain. It's just not
Mm,
there, you
mm.
know. Whereas if you've, agreed something, me and Sandeep agree something, I know what Sandeep, how he's living, I know his intentions, and I know that he's going to deliver on something because it's not trust. It's deeper than that. It's because you both understand, the basis of the exchange there, and whereas I have not got a clue what Mr. Sainsbury's is doing. I have no idea what life he's living. I don't know what his intentions are. Which, to go and buy an avocado, you think, oh, you're overthinking it, but put it to building a house, put it to, the building a house is like the biggest purchase of people's lives, and yet it's like now in England, house builders they're building 50% less houses than they were 3 years ago. Because the prices aren't what they want them to be, and because
I'm
there's
going
not
to
enough people buying them. No, sorry, go
and
on.
just call a 5-minute warning, and we'll pull this to an end in 5 minutes.
Yep.
We're
Sure.
reaching now. So
Yes, in summary, I just think it'll come when people can interact with it easier than, they're not going to be able to learn about the theory of it in as much detail as we have the time to do, but they'll learn through, their own actions, their own experience.
I think the
And I
truth,
just,
it, I've the truth is actually pretty ugly in my view. I don't think people want bills of exchange. I think they feel threatened by anything, ideas that will actually call into question whether that avocado is actually going to be there, or ideas in their own mind of whether the avocado is actually going to be there. The reality is actually pretty ugly in people's minds, but we can actually change it in ourselves. And if we can demonstrate that between ourselves, that's the path how we can
Yeah.
move forward to possibly changing other people, as unlikely as that could be.
I mean, they need to. If you're not growing the stuff that you put into your mouth and and if you don't do that, then someone's doing that for you, and that relationship has to be fair for all. It's as simple as that, and we'll get there. We need to talk about your view on the extractive industries, Michael, given your background, maybe in the next one.
I have a question on that. Michael, when you were saying about bills and, someone grows something and you give them some steel or gold or silver, where do you get the gold and silver and steel from? Do you extract it yourself?
No, it actually, this is a really key point. No, you don't. It actually comes out of the pool of, okay, if it's copper, it will come out of the pool of copper that's already above ground, that's already available to be marketed, or in the sub pool that is could be readily converted into a form that could be marketable. So yeah, all the copper that we need to do the exchanges is already either in marketable form or close to marketable form. Excuse me.
I think that's the way we're thinking about steel as well. So the way that we want to think about steel is that it's already there. We don't need to convert more iron ore into fresh steel for the steel industry. That's something that we need to get across to people as well. Is that it's everything is available to you more easily than you can imagine if you begin to imagine like we do. That should be marketing point in itself to people, hopefully. is that it gets them what they want.
Yeah. This is a question of marketing things as such. It's a matter of it involves other things.
Yeah,
We're
it's
not
more than that. It's put it. Yeah, we need to. How do we get people to change their philosophy or their spirituality basis or level? You know, it's something that comes from within. So it's not something that we can direct upon
correct.
society.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
we can put on a show though, and a demonstration, as you say, a real life demonstration. So all the world's a stage, rather than just having it as some little show that we put on. We can do it like that. We can do it
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Great,
At that
guys.
point, stop the recording. Okay. So I'm just going to go in